Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, it's one of our special interview pods, so let's dispense with what have you been doing since we last spoke? Because we last spoke about 90 seconds ago, oddly, about basketball and the size of my microphone. It's a very male conversation, but anything interesting happened in the last 90 seconds?
No. Yeah, me. World's most boring man. Nothing ever happens. Nothing exciting happens to me.
Anybody who's been to one of our live shows recently, Kieran, will be disputing that fact, even as you speak. As I say, it is a special interview today, and it's a really interesting one. This is a spoiler alert. We've just recorded the interview, and it was really interesting. It was with a chap called Josh Charalambous, who's a partner in the law firm RPC, and Josh is a specialist in sports arbitration, in sports panels, but mainly in investment into football clubs. And he gave us some great insight, really interesting insight. This is what Josh had to say. Josh, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're looking forward to talking to you about all things football club investment. But before we do that, let's do what we always do and ask you to talk us through a little bit your extensive CV, but focusing on your current work in football investment and commercial regulation.
Perfect. Yeah, and thank you very much, guys, for having me. So I'm a partner in a law firm in London. The law firm's called RPC, and I've been working there for about 9 years. And most of the investment work I do in football is primarily related around buying and selling football clubs and or helping people get money into clubs and or clubs get money into them so that they can spend some cash often or make the most commercially of the opportunities that they've got in front of them. So that's me.
And obviously the important question, the one that our listeners really want to know, is who do you support?
I'm a Leeds fan, so dirty Leeds. Although I hasten to say I wasn't in Jersey, so it wasn't me, Kieran. So before we get the interview off to a bad start,
we shall explain that to baffled new listeners at a different time. But I'm very glad you. I like the fact that you're a little bit scared of Kieran, and you had to get that in early in the interview, Josh.
I did. I definitely didn't want a Paxman rendition from Kieran, so I thought I'd try and get him on side early.
Oh well, I'll do the Paxman 27 times. Was it you, Josh? Yeah.
I've never been to Jersey.
Josh, we've spoken a lot on the pod in the past 4 years, and in our latest book about the change in football club ownership models. But whether you're a local businessman made good, an international investor, or a nation state, football clubs rarely make money. So what's in it for investors?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because maybe football clubs are not the most attractive when it comes to opportunities to make a profit on a P&L basis. I still think that people look at football clubs as an opportunity to grow value. So if they can fund the losses or break even and grow the value of the club, then they see that as obviously an opportunity to make a profit. So I think profits, whether rightly or wrongly, is on the list still for investors in terms of an ability to make money on their investment. But there are definitely other factors to it. There are people who just want to be associated with a football club. You get the sort of the brand association benefits. You might have other reputational benefits of being associated with a football club. And then, like you say, there's potentially personal interests as well. I'm sure that there are some owners who are very altruistic and believe in giving back to the community. Probably also some owners that have a bit of an ego trip and want to be the ones to have saved the club. So there obviously are those dynamics, but I think the the view that you can still make a profit from buying and selling a club rather than, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's pretty difficult to run, clubs on a P&L profit basis. But I think that kind of making money by association is probably one of the big ones.
Do you often find, Josh, that there's a naivety from some of the people who approach you for help in investing in football clubs? Because it does seem to us as outsiders that clever, grown-up business people seem to lose their head a little bit when it comes to investing in football clubs, and they make decisions that they wouldn't make about buying other businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely an emotional aspect to investing in football, which you don't often see in other sectors, or we don't see perhaps as often in other sectors. That's a bit less so when you have institutional investors, if you have private equity or venture capital in there. But when you have rich individuals or individuals who are able to control a lot of the cash, then you do sometimes have some interesting decisions. And those interesting decisions come right at the beginning when people express an interest in a club. But I can't keep count of the number of times when acting on club side, somebody comes along and says, they're interested, and you ask for proof of funds, and they sort of go, I didn't realize I'd have to do that so quickly, or I didn't realize I'd have to kind of show the cash so early on. And you'd have thought in other sectors that would be quite fundamental, but it is quite shocking actually on that side of things. I mean, thankfully, once you get past that process, you have all of the other joys and dramas and those sort of interesting decision making points that you make really come into fruition after they've taken control. So yeah, but I think it can make people go a bit disorientated.
I'm a bit taken aback by that. I think Kieran will be less surprised by that than I am, but that's almost like me asking an estate agent if I can see a £3 million house just because I want to have a look around it, knowing that I've got no intention of buying it. That's very interesting. Are there any current obvious trends, Josh, in the types of investment we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, you're right. It is a bit like going to an estate agent without the money, or test driving a Ferrari when you think you're going to be able to get your finance sorted later, but you don't. Not that I do that, obviously. I mean, I think if you're going to pick three big trends in the types of investment, we're definitely still seeing a lot of private equity and venture capital investment in football, and largely, I think that's because they obviously have mandates to invest money in areas where they think that they can influence growth and kind of bring a professionalization to the table. So that trend is absolutely still on the rise. There has been quite a lot made of different consortia or consortiums. I don't know what the correct Latin is. I probably should as a lawyer, shouldn't I? Made up of multiple parties where the money's coming from lots of different places, and some people are bringing skills, some people are bringing profile, some people are bringing cash, and you're kind of putting these people together and looking to make big investments. I mean, that's particularly common on sort of either projects which require big capital investment to make a difference, maybe because the club is so big. Think Chelsea, or where a lot of capital investments needed to change the dial and get clubs out of a league. Think Leeds. Think Wrexham. I don't think I'd ever thought I would ever say think Leeds and think Wrexham in the same sentence, but I'm saying it now. Obviously, that's a reflection, a reflection of that trend. I think, and then obviously, I think you touched on it before. The kind of there are still the ultra high net worths and or the nation states influence. I think that that third limb is really the reflective of that kind of trying to make money by association, sort of using the or enhance a reputation by association piece.
Don't worry about the Leeds Wrexham thing, Josh. You'll be back in the Premier League soon. Just shortly after you've sued Everton out of it, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think we're probably third in the queue, Kevin. on that one behind Burnley and
yeah,
the others.
We may come back to that later, Josh. Kieran and I have discussed this before on the pod, but what do you think makes a club attractive to investors, without obviously naming any specific clubs? What are the circumstances in which an investor would go, this is potentially a very good investment? And I presume in that club doesn't necessarily have to be in the Premier League for it to be potentially a very good investment.
No, often they're not. Often a club is, maybe they've been relegated from the Premier League or relegated out of the Premier League and in the Championship, but have some existing infrastructure, have a big, an existing sort of loyal and big fan base that might make them attractive. I think if we're going to loop back to those kind of the core reasons why people are looking at football, the chance of making profit on the growth, the kind of purchase and sale, there are some quite attractive options, I think, in the Championship and in League One for people who have enough money to be able to ride the funding and the losses that they're probably going to be incurring at the moment, and for a comparatively modest amount can try to invest in the squad and kind of get them up and sort of make them get them ready for, I guess, an onward investment or a kind of a bigger investment. So I think we're seeing probably most of the deals at our end anyway seem to be polarized. We have lots of interest in clubs who are lower down the pyramid, who even if they've got some debt that needs clearing, there's a clear opportunity to invest in the squad and make a big difference early. And then at the other end of the extreme, the sort of other activity seems to be the kind of clubs where they're probably being valued in the sort of several hundreds of millions, and I think that's because the attraction there is that those clubs are one or two transfer windows or a stadium redevelopment or an enhancement to the infrastructure away from really kind of growing the value, and people want to be associated with that journey. So probably the polarized ends of the spectrum are where people are currently looking, where we're seeing the most activity, and I think slight elephant in the room when we've talked about Everton, obviously because they've got their points deduction, at least at the time of recording, and profit and sustainability compliance and where you are on the P&S journey is also quite important, I think, to investors, because if you're bringing cash to the table and you want to see an instant hit from your investment, you don't want to be necessarily hamstrung by spending of previous regimes.
We definitely will be tackling the elephant in the room. I'm taking a big deep breath before we approach the elephant in the room. But Kieran, I'd like to bring you in here because you've advised clubs and investors, so you've seen both sides of this argument. When Josh talks about an instant here, how long is instant? Can you define what instant is for investors? In other words, how long would it take for an investor, do you think, to suddenly start getting suspicious that he might not be getting their money back, or she might not be getting their money back?
Well, if you take a look at Newcastle United, instant was within 2 or 3 transfer windows. It went from a club that was, if we're honest, part of the other 14 to a club which is now in the Champions League and is doing very well this season as well. So I think that's indicative of not just spending money, but spending money well. That can work. Then you've probably got other clubs, the likes of Derby County, I think, is a good example of where somebody came in, put a lot of money in, and then realised after 4 or 5 years, probably with the nagging of the children saying, "Dad, that's our inheritance that is disappearing very, very quickly, that this isn't working," and they took an exit route of going via administration. So it doesn't have to be very long. It's a case of employing the right people to make the right decisions. And then you can get that return. But I'd absolutely agree with Josh in terms of the bits in between can be quite horrendous. It's a bit like buying a racehorse. The 2 best days are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. The bits in between tend to be quite expensive, but if you have enough success in between, then you can put it out to stud and get your money back in exactly the same way that you can sell the club at a higher price.
One day we will buy a racehorse. Once they made the film of this pod, Kieran, we'll buy a racehorse, and then we'll have a massive falling out like Alex Ferguson, Man United. Something's just occurred to me, Josh, off the back of you talking about the multi-million end scale. John Textor, who owns 40% of my club, Crystal Palace, recently said out loud that he regretted not buying it outright because he felt that he now owns 40% of a club and has less than 10% influence. And we've just seen Jim Ratcliffe buying 25% of Manchester United. Might he regret that then in terms of what John Textor said about not buying a club outright?
I suppose the devil will be in the detail of the investment from Sir Jim Ratcliffe as to what does he get other than a shareholding for his investment. Is he going to be getting some kind of special voting rights on certain decisions? Has some of the money been earmarked for projects that he will have decision-making power in terms of investing in the stadium? So I think the answer is the classic lawyer's answer, which I always hate giving, but depends, I suppose. But it's such a good. It is such a good point, and I always default back to my club, which is Leeds United, and when Andrea Radrizzani bought the club, he bought it outright, and then in the periods between that and him selling, there'd obviously been disposals of part of the shareholding to the 49ers Enterprises, and there was a period of time where the ratio of ownership was much closer to that kind of 40-45%. As a very significant and influential minority shareholder, but not the people who are driving, who are at the wheel driving the car. And Leeds got relegated, and that was probably in no small part down to the fact that you didn't have an obvious person at the helm who knew that they were going to be there in the future and had control in that decision making. So it's not surprising to me that Mr. Textor has said that, or that's the view. But I suppose hindsight's a wonderful thing, and maybe he also would have benefited from having 100% or more control earlier, because you'd have thought Crystal Palace's value may have grown in that period of time as well.
Very well done for saying it depends. I hope you notice you got a mile. You got a smattering of applause there for Kieran and I. Like you just hit a 4 through the covers at Lords on the second day of a county test match. We always like to hear our lawyers confirm everything we suspect about them.
Exactly, and you'll get you won't get an invoice for that. Don't worry.
Josh, what about clubs like Ipswich, Josh, who are acquired as part of a pension fund, essentially? Do fans of Ipswich and other clubs just have to accept that they will be sold off as soon as the owners sniff enough of a profit to get rid?
I suppose it depends. Yeah, I suppose it depends again, doesn't it? But yes, if you're a fan base, I mean, the context for Ipswich, I suppose, is slightly different in that they were. They probably felt at rock bottom, didn't they? But and now, seeing the benefits of having some stability at the club, they have been going toe to toe with with a Leicester side who have just dropped down from the Premier League with a very expensive squad, and Ipswich are sort of doing that kind of bounce up and then kind of take that momentum going forward. So maybe if you straw polled the fans now, maybe they'd be happy with the fact that they've got a decent shot at being kind of putting themselves in the shop window, I suppose, for investors. It's never nice, is it, as a fan base, to feel like your club is sort of constantly on the market or about to change hands, and it doesn't offer that kind of longer term view. But maybe with Ipswich, the context is more that it feels a bit more consolidated, and at least kind of on the pitch, it feels positive. But it is an issue. You do have clubs that it feels like they're on the market all the time, or who feel like they're constantly changing hands, and if you're owned by a group who obviously owe their interests to the people who are invested in those pension schemes, for example. You don't have necessarily the passion project of the local businessman or the diehard Ipswich fan who's always wanted them to succeed and will always be there for them. So I can totally see it. I can totally see, what you're saying.
But I suppose as well, Josh, coming back to an earlier discussion, you have to congratulate the investors and whoever advised the investors into Ipswich, because notwithstanding their tremendous history, that was essentially the 60s and 70s. So that they wouldn't have been high on my list of potential massive investments, but it really has paid off for them, though, isn't it? So somebody clearly did their homework and their research and thought this is a potentially, cynically, a big profit, but also a big project.
Yeah, completely. And I often think of Wrexham as the other example. I mean, was Wrexham going to be sort of high on the list of candidates for people we thought were going to get bought out by Hollywood stars? Probably not. I mean, as expert as Kieran is and as you are on the pod, I'm not sure that was being trailed a year in advance as being a club where we thought the investment was going to come in, and people have obviously done their homework there. Maybe there's an element of hindsight on the Ipswich deal, because it has gone so well for them on the pitch, and we all know that investment and money doesn't always necessarily result in good decision making and good outcomes on the pitch. But I think it certainly helps, and like you say, it's. It was a stroke of genius in many ways, because they probably picked up the club at a price which they just would not have been able to have done previously. When Ipswich were kind of stalwarts of the Championship and kind of in and around the Premier League.
Thank you so much for referring to me as an expert, Josh. I'm going to get producer guy to clip that and play at the start of every pod we do. Kieran's now got a face like a wet weekend in Grimsby, but apart from that, it's fine. I was looking at your website last night, the website of RPC, the company in which you are a partner. And what I found really interesting is the statistic that 48% of deals targeting European clubs last year were as part of multi-club deals. Will that figure be getting higher in future, do you think?
Well, I think it's a trend that's here to stay. I mean, it's obviously not a brand new thing, multi-club ownership, and often you have this squeeze, the sort of growth and contraction squeeze between lots more multi-club structures being in place, and then sports regulations almost catching up and deciding, well, we can't quite have this happening like that, or that these rules need to change to make sure that we are keeping everything competitive. And even this, for this coming season, UEFA had to publish a decision that said, look, we've been and spoken to the 3 or 4 clubs who are subject to multi-club ownership, and we've had to make sure we get the kind of reassurance that there's going to be no crossover of control or nothing untoward going on. Aston Villa were one of those clubs, and they had to basically get UEFA comfortable with the position that they were in. So it's not like it's new, but it's certainly a growing trend, and I think the data bears that out. I think it's going to continue to rise, and I think we're also going to see a continued rise in the kind of multi-sport offering as well. So effectively, almost as a lot of the leagues, even if they're not adopting a franchise model, but lots of kind of competitions and leagues across the kind of major team sports start to look and feel a bit more like they could end up with a franchise model, you may well see people wanting to harmonize brands across those competitions, or at least have create synergies between them. Jim Ratcliffe's investment, we don't know, or I don't know, at least when we're recording, whether that's in his personal capacity or whether it's an Ineos investment. But obviously Ineos have got sailing and Formula One and other football teams as well. You have the investment into Alpine Formula One that contained obviously people who have stakes in Liverpool, people who have obviously the Wrexham guys. Bristol Sport, that's got Bristol City, it's got Bristol Bears Rugby, it's got a basketball team. It's not. It's something I think we may see as the brand becomes important. I think multi-club's going to rise, and I think multi-sport as well.
Kieran, can I just bring you on briefly on a point Josh made there, because I know you make a study, possibly overstudy of FIFA and UEFA. Do you think there's a genuine fear at UEFA that a multi-club model, if it gets big enough, that might actually challenge UEFA's authority? I mean, if you've got 3 clubs that end up owning 40 clubs in Europe, do you think that could become almost a separate entity that would challenge UEFA?
I don't think so, because there will be significant opposition prior to getting that far. We've seen, as Josh said, that they've made both the owners of Aston Villa and Tony Bloom at Brighton get rid of their investments because of potential conflicts of interest. Where I find it intriguing is where we're going to stand from a FIFA point of view, because FIFA are incredibly jealous of UEFA. UEFA make a fortune every year from the Champions League, and they make a lot of money once every 4 years from the European Championships. Whereas FIFA are just making money once every 4 years. So they're trying to bring in the FIFA World Club Cup. Now that's going to involve 32 teams, and there I think the opportunities to have conflicts of interest, because what we are seeing as far as the MCO is concerned is that you've got the owners buying one club in South America, one in Asia, one in the Middle East, one here and there. Well, with 32 teams now competing, you could see 2 clubs owned by PIF or the City Football Group be drawn together. And what is FIFA's response going to be? I think anybody that's observed FIFA behaviour historically will be that there will be a large broom, a bit of carpet, and money solves everything. But I think the integrity of the sport would be called into question as a result.
Josh, amongst our listeners and the wider football world, there's been a lot of, I wouldn't say interest, but I think the actual word is paranoia about increased US investment in English football, as we've seen with your club, Dirty Leeds, of course. What are your views? I mean, there's you hear this conspiracy theory time and time again. As soon as the Americans own 14 Premier League clubs, that'll be it. It'll be closed off. It'll be franchises. It's not a view I agree with, but I'm just interested in your views in why the US are not all of a sudden, but are increasingly looking to the Premier League and English football to invest in.
Well, I think English football presents an opportunity to get in front of eyeballs and growth and reach audiences, which, if you are looking at people who already own teams or clubs or franchises in the US and are kind of wanting to invest in English football, that looks very attractive, and I think they see a lot of opportunity for growth. And also, we've been in a phase where, from an economic perspective and from a currency perspective, the US dollar has gone further in recent years than maybe it would have done before. So the cost of buying in an English football club may not have been as daunting when you kind of look at some of the numbers which were which are sort of bandied around in the US. I completely get the point that's made about the concern. I think if you were building English football from scratch with, say, US owners of 14 of the clubs, do I think they would have a closed league and a franchise model and make it feel very like a lot of the competitions in the US? Probably, that probably is what they would do. I think the fallout from the Super League, though, showed just how difficult and hard and how unpopular that would be. And so a lot of the noises that we hear from US investors, both on both sides of a deal, are we get it, we understand, we can't replicate the US model exactly here. There are probably some things that we do in the US that we think would be well received in England, especially around the development of stadia and infrastructure and facilities and kind of fan experience. I think that there's a lot which they feel that they can bring to the party, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure we will see either a decrease in the US investment because they don't think they can have a closed league, or some kind of conspiracy necessarily working in the background. I mean, it was so unpopular. I mean, the fact that we've had a Conservative government saying they want greater regulation in an area where it's so traditionally been self-regulated, I think that speaks volumes about what the response would be if 14 of the clubs became owned by US owners and they decided to take the Premier League in a different direction.
But the European Super League, though, Josh, is exactly what you described. It's a closed league with guaranteed revenue streams. So surely that would be an ideal investment opportunity for Americans, wouldn't it?
Well, it may well be ideal if it existed and was ready, and it wasn't going to result in a fan mutiny. So I suppose that's the point. I think if they were going to be able to start from ground zero and pick a model, maybe it wouldn't be the model that we have now, but I think they may be stuck with it. I mean, and of course the advocates for the Super League were largely the non-English European clubs who saw an opportunity. Maybe they saw an opportunity to create the franchise model because they thought it would also be very attractive to investors, whether from the US or outside, or maybe they just saw some dollar signs. Who knows?
You lawyers and your technicalities. It doesn't exist. It's a mere technicality, Josh.
That's true. That is true. Not very creative in our thinking, are we?
There's also no, it's just the fact the way you slapped me down with 3 reasons why it wouldn't happen. The first being the Super League doesn't exist and never will. I thought that was really well done. Well handled, sir. We've also seen, Josh, and this is my penultimate questions. You've given us a lot of time. We're always rather edgy when we go overtime with lawyers, but we've seen big potential. We've seen big potential US investment in Lewes Women's Football Club. Is that another trend you can see continuing, or is one example of interest in the Women's Football Club too soon to call it a trend?
I don't think it's too soon to call it a trend. I mean, maybe talking about Lewes as a trend, maybe because Lewes is, by design, by nature, the way that they are, and the people who are running the show there are super impressive people. There aren't 20 Lewises, there's one. So that's probably why they're so attractive to investment. But the broader principle of looking to invest in women's football or clubs which have got successful women's teams, or an ability to invest in the women's side of a club and achieve promotions and growth there, is something that we are seeing a lot more activity in, actually, both in terms of real work that's coming through the door, but also actually when you're out and about at events. I was at the Leaders in Sport conference, and basically every other session was all around investment in women's sport and the growth of the women's game, and that just would not have been the case at that conference 2 years ago, 3 years ago. There's a significant amount of momentum in women's sport generally, we've just had the launch of Premiership Women's Rugby at the weekend. And we've got the Women's World Cup in the rugby coming up soon as well in the coming years. It's a train that everybody really wants to be on, and I think we're seeing that in terms of activity. The numbers at the moment, in terms of the amounts that people are paying for clubs or investing, whether as partnerships or corporate deals, are obviously not yet at a level that people would necessarily want them to be at, but it is absolutely heading in that direction. And I think the Lewis deal is a really good example of people backing that horse. And by all accounts, Mercury 13 look and sound pretty serious about the investment and the capital that they want to bring to the market. So I think we can see a lot more there.
It's very good to hear you say, Josh, that there is much more interest in investing in women's sport, but presumably those who do invest in women's sport will have to be even more patient in terms of getting a return on that investment than people who are currently investing in men's football, will they?
That is a good question, because I suppose different people have different patience tolerance levels, don't they? I think probably yes, but I think there's a lot more. People are going in with a much more open mind and positive and optimistic mind about the journey that they're going to be going on. And whereas I think perhaps in some of the investment in men's football, we were talking earlier about what does it mean to have an instant hit, or what does it mean to see an immediate return or a quick return on investment. I don't think that is going to be obsessing the people who are investing in women's football at the moment in the same way. So I think on balance, probably. I actually think patience is key in any investment. It's just that people perhaps don't have as much patience with investment in the kind of passion projects of the men's game. But I suppose that's a personal opinion, just based on what we're seeing, and maybe others perceive that differently.
Finally, Josh, let's approach the elephant in the room with some caution. Let's tiptoe sideways on to the elephant in the room. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about the Everton story, Josh, because you are somebody with extensive experience of arbitration panels as well as football investment. So as we speak, it's Friday. It's a week since the 10-point deduction. We don't know the outcome of any potential appeal. But as of this moment, what do you think, or how do you think the points deduction will affect the attitude of 777, or indeed the asking price of Everton Football Club?
And probably also the onward investment or other investment 777 may well be looking for as well. And I think it's all probably wrapped up in the same point. It's very rare. I mean, I've never personally come across it in day-to-day work that when you have a deal on the table where there's a known risk of something big happening to create a liability for the company that's been bought, that you don't thrash out in advance the different permutations of what you're going to do about it. And so, and there are many different ways of dealing with a liability like this. It may be to reduce the price. It may be to keep the price at the level it was, but say that the previous owner or the seller has to bear the costs associated with any losses which come as a result. That's a bit trickier when you have a points deduction, of course, because you don't know necessarily until the end of the season what financial impact it may have had. Maybe it just means that you finished a few places lower than you thought you were going to do. So you're just really looking at prize money difference. You get awarded prize money based on a place. But it may be that you get relegated. And how do you go about quantifying that? That's quite difficult. That's quite a difficult thing to do. It's possible. It's definitely possible, because we see quite a lot of claims from clubs who have been relegated and decide to blame everybody else apart from themselves. So you see these private arbitration claims coming in with some grand numbers around loss of chance. Yeah, I've been relegated to League One, or I've been relegated to League Two, and if it wasn't for you dastardly accountants or advisors giving me terrible advice, we would have made it to the Premier League, wouldn't we? So it's all about how easily can you quantify and understand what the liability is, and with Everton, I imagine that nothing will happen straight away. I imagine that either the asking price was lowered, or there's a strict mechanism that's been agreed. And part of that mechanism may well be that the sellers of Everton need to fund and seek to appeal the decision and reduce the sanction. I think once you've exhausted rights of challenge, and you probably see where the dust lies, either at the end of the season or you can probably take a view now. If it's a 3-point deduction, maybe they built in a tolerance and say if we're going to be deducted more than 5 points, then this happens. If it's less than 5 points, then that happens. But one thing for sure, unless there's lots of people have been negligent, in which case there's more issues to deal with. It's been thought about and dealt with, and sort of proactively thought about in advance.
That's the bit I was really interested in, Josh, and you've preempted my final question. So we can assume then that if 777 did their proper due diligence or were properly advised, they would have been fully aware that there was a Premier League investigation going on and that there are a range of outcomes, and therefore the initial deal would have encompassed that information.
I think so. I mean, there's been no suggestion that.
Good. Right. Okay.
Well. I mean, when Burnley got relegated before, there was all of there was a lot of chat about whether people would be challenging the Premier League's decision not to have charged Everton back in that season. I remember saying then, because one of the defences from Everton at that time, which you obviously can't really look at in any detail until you see the full written reasons and decision of a panel. So it's one of my big bugbears actually of sports disputes, is you never really know what's going on until you kind of have the sort of head coming above the parapet every so often. But what happened there, I remember saying then, Everton say that they've told the Premier League all about all of this, so it's going to be fine. And I found that quite a challenging thing to reconcile. So even then, people knew that there was an issue that was likely to be being investigated by the Premier League. So there's no suggestion, for example, in this deal 777 have been, it's been kept from them, or there's been some kind of hiding of the fact that this was going on. So I think they must have been told and kept up to date by the club, or certainly should have been, and if properly advised, as I'm sure they must have been, they will have preempted different permutations. Not all. Sometimes the permutations don't actually cover every eventuality, and you may end up sort of falling between two different scenarios, and that can sometimes be a problem. But I would expect in this case, they all know what's going to happen. It's just the Everton fans probably don't know, and certainly we don't know what they've agreed and how they're going to divvy it up.
Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning. It's some real insight into some issues that I've been struggling with lately. So I really thank you for that. And thank you for your time. And I've got no doubt that we'll be trying to get in touch with you again in the future for even more chat and insight. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very, very much for having me.
Kieran, I was particularly interested, in everything Josh had to say, but when we eventually got to the elephant in the room, I was particularly interested to hear Josh say something that we've heard all sorts of things about 777 that would indicate that perhaps they don't operate as other companies do. So I was interested to hear that he said they would have done absolute due diligence beforehand, and they would have known absolutely that there is an issue ongoing at Everton Football Club, and that they would have gone through a range of options as to what would happen when that issue was resolved. But I suddenly, as Josh finished his answer, then made me wonder whether that's one of the reasons 777 landed on Everton in the first place because they thought there might be circumstances in which they could offer a much lower asking price.
Well, any opportunity to lower the price will always be seized upon. But I agree entirely with Josh. They will have done their homework. With respect to that, they'll have looked at a potential loss of income in future years, which could include relegation. First of all, Everton aren't going to get relegated, even with a 10-point penalty. And my gut feeling is that 10-point penalty will be reduced on appeal. But it's part of negotiation. When you're buying or selling a house or a car, you'll always find something to say, well, the price needs to go down. The fact that there could be a further financial settlement between Everton and other clubs, I think the way that Josh described it was valid, and we've seen similar things in respect of sort of positive earnouts when I've looked at deals. When new owners have come in, that they've offered to, they've said we'll pay X and we'll pay an additional such and such if the club's promoted within the next 3 years. So that can work on both a positive and a negative format.
Interesting as well, I thought, Josh's response to my... Well, also I like the fact, the technicality that the European Super League doesn't exist and will never exist. That was a lovely, gentle little slap down there. But I thought it was very interesting talking about the paranoia about 14 Premier League clubs being American owned and potential changes, when he pointed out that a government, a party that normally, I think the word light touch is what they say. There's a government that prefers a light touch when it comes to financial regulation, is only too happy to have a regulator for the Premier League. I thought that's a very interesting point. Yes,
I mean, the government will have seen the extent of the rejection by fans, and also, there's a lot of criticism of the sneaky six clubs. I don't think enough credit was given to the fans of those clubs who unified and said, if we go ahead with this, if we endorse this, then we get guaranteed European football forever. But they said, we understand the importance of the pyramid. That's what we were brought up on. And you've got Manchester City fans saying, look, we were in League One, 15, 20 years ago. Chelsea fans saying, we remember when we went 50 years without winning anything apart from the odd FA Cup. And they came together. So I think there is a degree of comfort there. The government isn't going to alienate what every football fan's a voter. So why alienate them? Where we go forwards in terms of the Premier League continuing to lobby with regards to the white paper, trying to dilute some of the rules, I think will be an interesting position that we'll be having this discussion probably in 6-9 months' time when the legislation has gone through.
Thank you to Josh Charalambous for that really interesting interview, and thank you for saying out loud, it depends. I really appreciated that as well. And thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you. It'll also get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. You can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you do it in the next few days, then you can join our next Discord session for our Ultras, which will be on Tuesday, the 28th of November at 7:30 p.m. Remember, if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, on our regular Monday Questions pod, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. As we mentioned before, Kieran and I will be in Hastings in December for a book event with the East Sussex Libraries. That's on Wednesday, the 13th of December. We'll be talking about our new book, discussing a few pressing football finance matters, of course, as well, giving you a bit of gossip afterwards, no doubt. You can meet us both. You can grab a copy of the book. You can bring a copy with you, which we will happily sign, although you'll notice that in advance, Kieran has much nicer handwriting than I have, and also takes up much more of the page, leaving me to squeeze my little, not that it's an issue, but there you go. Tickets are free for this event because it's a libraries event, and Kieran and I and producer Guy are all very passionate about supporting libraries. So tickets are free, but very limited. So if any of you down in Sussex who love the pod fancy a night out in Hastings for the most exciting thing to happen down there for 967 years, then please click the link in the show notes and register for your ticket. And of course, if you'd like to buy our latest book or one of our other books, or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt, you can find details on our website, priceoffootball.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.